Have you ever forgiven someone only to realize they walked right back into your life carrying the same knife they once used to wound you? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that's exactly what happens when we forgive people who have not done the inner work to change. They simply replay the same patterns because nothing inside them is shifted. Think of it like this. Imagine you lend your car to a friend who has no brakes. They promise to drive carefully, you trust them, and 5 minutes later, they crash again. The problem isn't their intention, it's that they never fix the brakes. In human terms, those brakes are self-awareness, accountability, and personal growth. Without them, no matter how sincere their apology sounds, the outcome will be the same. Jung believed every person has a shadow, the hidden side of our personality that holds the traits we deny or reject about ourselves. Some people live entirely in that shadow, refusing to face it, while others project it onto everyone around them. If they haven't confronted their own darkness, your forgiveness simply becomes permission for them to keep harming you. That's why in today's video, we're going to talk about 7 types of people we should not forgive without change. These aren't about grudges or punishment, they're about boundaries, self-respect, and protecting your peace. We'll break down the subtle psychological patterns behind these behaviors through the lens of Carl Jung's insights, so you can spot them early and decide wisely who truly deserves a second chance. And here's what I want from you. As we go through the list, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever forgiven someone who hadn't changed, and, if so, what happened next? Or, have you ever seen real transformation in someone before forgiving them? Share your story, because your experience might be exactly what someone else here needs to read today. By the end of this video, you'll have a sharper radar for spotting unchanging behavior, and you'll understand why, as Jung might put it, forgiveness without change is like planting flowers in poisoned soil. No matter how beautiful the seeds, nothing healthy will grow. 1. The perpetual shadow dwellers. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow describes the unconscious parts of our personality that we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge. Some people live entirely in this shadow state, never seeking self-awareness. These are individuals who repeatedly harm others but never confront the truth about themselves. Forgiving them without evidence of change is like lending money to someone who has openly admitted they will never repay it. Their unresolved shadow will continue to leak into their actions, and you will remain the canvas they project their darkness onto. When someone refuses to acknowledge their harmful patterns, they are essentially making a silent declaration: "I have no intention of changing." Jung warned that what remains unconscious will appear in our lives as fate. This means that a person stuck in denial will keep replaying the same behaviors over and over because they have never integrated their shadow into conscious awareness. If they are unwilling to face their darkness, your forgiveness becomes a hall pass for them to continue harming. Forgiving a perpetual shadow dweller is dangerous because they often disguise their behavior with charm, excuses, or victimhood. They may temporarily act good when faced with consequences, but as soon as the pressure lifts, the old patterns resurface. Jung believed the first step to real change is self-confrontation, and without it, a person's shadow runs their life like an invisible puppeteer. If they refuse this inner work, forgiveness simply resets the cycle of harm. Real change in such people would involve deep reflection, therapy, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. This process is not overnight. It may take years of inner work before they can genuinely behave differently. Until then, forgiveness without change becomes emotional self-sabotage for you because you're giving them emotional credit they have not earned. The healthiest stance is to withhold forgiveness until you see tangible transformation, consistent actions over time that show they have not only met their shadow, but learned to control it. This is not punishment, it is self-preservation. As Jung noted, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Let them face their fate without dragging you along. 2. The repeat offenders of trust. Jung often spoke of the necessity of individuation, the process of becoming whole through integrating all aspects of the self. People who repeatedly betray trust, however, are trapped in fragmentation. They may show you only a polished, socially acceptable persona, while hiding manipulative tendencies behind the mask. These individuals can charm, persuade, and apologize convincingly, yet underneath, they lack the integrity required for real relationship stability. Without genuine self-integration, their betrayals are not accidents, they are habits. The problem with forgiving such individuals prematurely is that betrayal is not usually a one-time event. It is a pattern deeply rooted in their psyche. Whether it's lying, cheating, stealing, or emotional manipulation, the behavior often stems from unhealed wounds, fears, or entitlement. Jung would argue that their shadow aspect is overpowering their conscious moral values, meaning the persona they present to you is a performance, not a reality. In this state, forgiveness becomes the stage on which they rehearse their next offense. Repeat offenders of trust often rely on the psychological loophole of "you forgave me before, so you'll forgive me again." This is a dangerous form of conditioning where your compassion trains them to expect leniency. Jung warned against mistaking the persona for the true self, and here, the offender's persona is the mask of repentance that hides their unchanged inner reality. Without confronting the root of their dishonesty, they are merely pressing pause between betrayals. Change of this type of person requires more than promise, as it requires radical self-examination and a willingness to feel the discomfort of accountability. They must dismantle their false persona and deal honestly with their shadow. Until they commit to that process, any forgiveness you give them will feed their cycle of deceit rather than break it. Jung's work reminds us that unintegrated people cannot sustain moral behavior under pressure. It's not cruel to withhold forgiveness, it's intelligent boundaries. Until you see sustained action, truth-telling without being cornered, transparency without being asked, and integrity when it costs them your trust, should remain locked. As Jung might put it, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But until they do, they are only who their shadow allows them to be. 3. The emotional manipulators. Carl Jung warned about the dangers of projection, placing one's unwanted feelings, fears, or desires onto another person. Emotional manipulators are masters at projection. They twist reality until you doubt your perceptions, often using guilt, shame, or flattery to keep you compliant. Their unconscious mind thrives on controlling others to avoid facing their own insecurities. If you forgive them without demanding change, you are essentially giving permission for them to rewrite your reality at will. These individuals often play the role of the wounded victim, while covertly orchestrating situations that keep them in control. Jung's shadow theory explains this well. The parts of themselves they refuse to acknowledge, such as envy, rage, or self-hatred, are projected onto you. Suddenly, you are the selfish one, the unstable one, or the ungrateful one, even though their behavior provoked the situation. Forgiveness without change in this dynamic strengthens their hold over you. The challenge is that emotional manipulators are skilled at making you feel responsible for their happiness or distress. They exploit your empathy and compassion, knowing you want to help. Jung observed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But in manipulation, only one person transforms into a version of themselves that pleases the manipulator, while the manipulator remains unchanged. For real change, manipulators must confront the part of themselves that fears vulnerability and equality in relationships. They must recognize and own their projections instead of outsourcing them. This requires intense self-awareness, which most manipulators resist because it threatens their power. Without that confrontation, they will continue to manipulate under the guise of love, friendship, or care. If they refuse to show consistent accountability and self-correction, withholding forgiveness is not cruelty, it is the refusal to be an emotional puppet. Jung might remind us that until a manipulator integrates their shadow, they will remain enslaved to it, dragging you down in the process. 4. The chronic boundary violators. Boundaries, Jung might say, are the outer walls that protect the castle of the self. Chronic boundary violators have no respect for these walls. They may overstep in small ways, borrowing things without asking, interrupting your personal time, or in bigger ways, such as disregarding your emotional or physical safety. In their psyche, your autonomy does not exist as separate from their wants. Forgiving them without change effectively gives them a key to your castle and permission to ransack it at will. Often, boundary violators operate from entitlement or unconscious narcissism. Jung's idea of individuation emphasizes that healthy relationships require two whole individuals who respect each other's separateness. Boundary violators fail at this. They see you as an extension of themselves or as a resource to exploit. Without developing self-awareness, they are unlikely to suddenly start respecting your space just because you forgave them. The difficulty is that some violators disguise their intrusions as help or concern. They may insist they know what's best for you, undermining your own judgment in the process. Jung warned against archetypes becoming inflated when a person overly identifies with a role like the savior or the authority. They lose sight of the other's individuality. In this case, forgiveness without change feeds their inflated self-image and keeps you in the role of the compliant subject. Real change in a boundary violator means they must see you as a separate individual with equal rights to space, time, and decision-making. This involves humility and the dismantling of their entitlement. It requires them to feel the discomfort of not always having access to you and to respect the no without trying to negotiate it away. Until that transformation occurs, forgiving them will not end the violations that will reinforce them. Jung might frame this as a failure of individuation on their part, and your role is not to complete that process for them. You guard your boundaries not to punish them, but to protect the wholeness you have worked to achieve. 5. The gaslighters. Gaslighting is a direct assault on your sense of reality, and Jung's theories on the psyche reveal why it's so insidious. When someone distorts your perception repeatedly, they are forcing you into their psychic narrative designed to keep their shadow hidden. They want you to doubt your memory, feelings, and intuition so that their version of events becomes the only one that matters. Forgiving a gaslighter without change is like handing over the steering wheel of your mind to someone who has already proven they will drive you off course. Gaslighters operate through projection and denial. Jung noted that denial of one's shadow often leads to its projection onto others. In gaslighting, this projection is weaponized. The very flaw or wrongdoing they refuse to admit becomes the accusation they throw at you. If they are dishonest, you become the liar. If they are cruel, you become the abuser. Without confronting their inner shadow, this pattern is not likely to end, no matter how many times you forgive. What makes gaslighting particularly damaging is that it erodes your confidence in your own self-perception. Over time, you may start relying on the gaslighter's version of reality instead of your own. Jung warned that losing connection to your inner truth leaves you vulnerable to domination by others. If you forgive without demanding they change, you are choosing continued erosion over healing. Change in a gaslighter would require them to embrace radical truth-telling and take full responsibility for their distortions. This means acknowledging past manipulations without deflecting, minimizing, or justifying. It requires an internal reckoning that is deeply uncomfortable for them, as it shatters their control over the narrative. Most gaslighters will avoid this unless they are faced with unavoidable consequences. Withholding forgiveness until you see consistent honesty is an act of reclaiming your mind. Jung's work reminds us that truth is a cornerstone of individuation, and no one who actively dismantles your truth should be given easy access to your trust again. 6. The perpetual victims. Jung's work on archetypes describes the victim as a psychological role that can be both healthy and unhealthy. In its healthy form, the victim archetype helps us acknowledge when we've been wronged. But the perpetual victim never leaves this role. They weaponize their suffering to manipulate others into meeting their needs, avoiding responsibility, or excusing harmful behavior. Forgiving them without change ensures you will remain their emotional caretaker indefinitely. Perpetual victims often resist change because victimhood provides them with power sympathy, lowered expectations, and the ability to deflect accountability. Jung noted that staying in a single archetype too long can lead to psychic inflation, where the role takes over the person's entire identity. For the perpetual victim, their sense of self becomes so tied to being wronged that they unconsciously seek situations that reinforce it. The danger of forgiving this type prematurely is that they will interpret your forgiveness as validation of their narrative. They were hurt, therefore nothing they did in response can be questioned. This narrative keeps them from integrating their shadow, which might contain traits like passivity, resentment, or manipulation. Without change, they remain locked in a cycle where every relationship eventually becomes a stage for their victimhood. Real change for a perpetual victim means they must confront the parts of themselves that benefit from staying powerless. This requires courage because it forces them to abandon the comfort of being blameless. Jung would frame this as a movement toward individuation, owning both the light and dark sides of the self, rather than outsourcing responsibility to fate or others. Until you see them taking genuine responsibility for their role in situations, not just telling sad stories or forgiveness, will only strengthen their victim identity. Protect your emotional resources by requiring not just apologies, but evidence of self-empowerment. 7. The habitual betrayers of themselves. Finally, Jung's idea that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely applies here. Some people betray themselves, so often breaking their own promises, abandoning their values, or sabotaging their goals that betraying you becomes second nature. If they cannot be loyal to their own word, they will not be loyal to yours. Forgiving them without change is like trusting someone to guard your treasure when they can't even keep their own safe. Self-betrayal is often rooted in deep unconscious conflicts. Jung believed that when we fail to reconcile the opposing parts of our psyche, we live in inner civil war. These individuals may promise change, but undermine themselves through procrastination, dishonesty, or self-destructive habits. If they are at war with themselves, their relationships inevitably become battlefields as well. The harm here is subtle. You may believe they mean well because they seem sincere in their intentions. But intentions without follow-through are empty. In Jungian terms, they are stuck in a loop where the shadow sabotages the ego's goals. Without conscious integration, they cannot break this loop, and your forgiveness simply resets the countdown to the next betrayal. Change for a habitual self-betrayer means they must face the parts of themselves that fear success, stability, or authenticity. This is deep shadow work, uncovering why they repeatedly undercut their own growth. Jung would say they must stop projecting their inner divisions outward and start resolving them internally. Until they demonstrate consistency not just in promises but in self-respect, forgiveness will keep you tied to someone who is constantly sinking. And as Jung warned, no tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. They must make that descent themselves. You cannot descend for them. Conclusion script. So, when we talk about the 7 types of people we should not forgive without change, it's not about holding on to bitterness, it's about holding on to yourself. Carl Jung taught us that what remains unconscious will keep showing up in our lives, wearing different faces but carrying the same lesson. If someone hasn't faced their own shadow, they're not ready to show up differently for you. Forgiveness is powerful, but it's not magic. It doesn't replace accountability, it doesn't rewrite patterns, and it doesn't repair what someone refuses to fix. Real change isn't just an apology, it's a consistent shift in behavior, proven over time. Without that, forgiving too soon is like giving someone the keys to a house they've already burned down. Your peace, your boundaries, and your self-respect are worth more than another round of the same pain. Wait for the evidence of growth, not just the words of regret. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever forgiven someone before they changed? What happened? Drop your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else set a boundary they've been too afraid to hold. Because in the end, forgiveness without change isn't healing, it's an invitation for history to repeat itself.